Welcome to the InStory Show. I'm Devorah Spilman, your host, and today I am thrilled to welcome InStory expert Janice Scissors. Hi, Janice.
Hi, Devorah.
So we're going to dive into a very powerful topic, how clearing clutter helps you come out of hiding. And Janice has kind of blown my mind by really showing me how for a lot of people, clutter is what they hide behind. And she's got a kind of a very wide concept of what clutter is. So, but before we dive into all that, just like everybody else, make almost everybody talk a little bit about what it was like for you when you were a kid, because it informs us so much about how we shone, but also how we got shut down. So tell us a little bit about your life as a kid.
Well, my life as a kid was, a normal average family, and I was a rambunctious little kid, ended up in the emergency room a lot because I just kind of did things and dove in and had my little injuries. But when I got into school, in grade school is when things started getting a little rough for me. I was the kind of person that, I was a decent student, but it was, I guess, close to second grade when they discovered I had dyslexia. And so my reading skills were way behind my grade level at that time. And that's because, I would start getting teased because of it. So I started shutting down. In spelling bees, I was always the first one to sit down because I couldn't spell. So all these little things kind of shut me down on just expressing myself. And I didn't know it at the time, but I also have always been an introvert, so that didn't help any. I was good on the kickball field, but playing kickball and good athletically, but that was the only time I really had a chance to really shine in my personality, because in the classroom I didn't. So once they discovered I had that and I learned to read, they felt back at that time that I was cured. Well, dyslexia is not something that you're cured with. And so I always struggled throughout school. I mean, I was still a pretty good student, but I also had two sisters. I was the middle child, and they both were straight A students. So I was the dumb one in the family. And I also there's 5 people in my family, and they were all extroverts. I was the introvert. So I was always felt like I was different.
It's funny. I think a lot of us had that feeling growing up for all different reasons. Like the people around us just didn't know stuff. Like they just didn't know. And a lot of introverts have this experience of feeling like there's something wrong with me. And it's just that you're just an introvert.
Right. But the way society has been, especially in the United States, is that to be successful, you are supposed to be an extrovert. You're supposed to go out there, out in the public, and express yourself and be assertive. And that's not the natural way for an introvert. So not only do you not see yourself going out and doing those things, you see something's wrong with you.
Right. I know. That's why I know you're reading Susan Cain's book, Quiet, and she has a TED Talk, but anyone who hasn't read her work or listened to her, she really is a champion for the introvert, because it's true. Our Western culture really extols the extrovert. And we taught with this whole conversation in the last series about the same problem with empaths and sensitive. So a lot of us introverts are often very sensitive also. So how did this lead you into the whole realm of clutter?
I think it's just kind of like I could not do things from start to finish a lot of times. My mind would just go everywhere, and I would get distracted because I always wanted to do different things. I was always thinking. My brain just never shut down, so I was always thinking from one thing onto the next. And I think that it really kind of started when my kids were young. And I had my own house and taking care of that. And a good friend of mine, she had children same age. They were like preschool and grade school age, her 2 children and my 2 children. And I would go to her house and everything would be perfect. Her dishes were washed, put away. The kids would play with their toys, but nothing else was out other than those. And it was just very frustrating. So one day I just asked her, I said, how do you do it? Because I just couldn't do it. Get the dishes clean and the house clean. I just couldn't keep it up. And it wasn't bad, but it was still not that perfect look. And I asked her, how do you do it? And her answer was very simple. I don't know. I just do it. And it was like, that was a turning point. Like, okay, I'm different. She cannot do things, you know, she does things differently than I do. So what is wrong with me? And I think and that's when I started reading books on decluttering. And after that point, I started recognizing and this was back in the early 80s, there weren't as many books now, but every year there seemed to be more and more books. So I think it became a problem that people were recognizing I didn't feel so alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel like I was so wrong. I mean, my mother was that way, you know, kept the house real clean. My mother-in-law kept the house real clean. I didn't like having people over because, you know, I felt like I could never be good enough with it. But as the more I read about the books, the more I tried to control the clutter, and just that just started that journey.
Well, what helped you to be, like, what are some of the things that helped you to be able to make a dent in it, to feel like you had, you know, a little bit more of a handle on it, right? We're never going to be somebody else's normal. Like that woman, she couldn't be cluttered. Like, that's just not who she was. So part of it is, you know, like, we're not trying to all of a sudden turn, you know, I'm an extrovert, turn an extrovert into an introvert, or vice versa. So it's, how did you manage it? Not how did you suddenly become perfect at keeping a clean house, right? Because it's not realistic. It's not who you are, you know. And that, the other thing is, I think so many people go through the what's wrong with me feeling.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of it, which I've really come to recognize recently, how my journey worked, is that I would read the books, I would try a system, it would work for a while, then it didn't, then I'd read some more books. So I think throughout I kept changing, and I realized just recently that the reason that some systems, and I, you know, one person would influence me in their writing, and then of course we got the websites helped out a lot too, because then it was easier with that. It was getting the support, knowing I wasn't the only one, but recognizing that how different people are, and also how different you become as an individual throughout your life stages.
Mm.
As my kids got older, the things that worked with the young toys, keeping them cluttered and, you know, keeping them decluttered, I should say, in boxes and whatever, wasn't the same as when they were older. And then once they moved out of the house, then it was a whole nother story, life stage of changing and looking at clutter. And I learned to adapt and change what worked for me for one system, moved on to the next system. And it was getting that help from others. And then as we got into, like I said, with the websites, that became even better, because then it wasn't just reading in my own home about it. There was the connection online, whether it was just reading with people or eventually getting into groups where you can ask your questions, you get the support, kind of like our InStory group, that having that support makes a difference, and you don't feel so alone. So it makes it easier to just, instead of hiding behind it, getting depressed with it, is to say, hey, you know, I can clear this out. I can do this. And even if I have to ask for help, which has always been a hard thing to do, it's becoming easier to be able to ask for help. And there's nothing to be ashamed of when you ask for help.
Right. Right. That's interesting that you brought that up, that a lot of times people do bump into shame issues around clutter. Mm-hmm. And around all kinds of things that we think we should be a certain way. Right? Like, I should be quieter because I'm an extrovert, and you should be more outgoing because you're an introvert. Like, what? Who says? But we, you know, I mean, we take that on. Okay, so talk a little bit about, as you got kind of better at it, like, I was interested in what you said about how you can hide behind your clutter. So I want to hear why you say that, and then how it changed.
Well, I think when you feel like you're not good enough in doing things. And you know, one little example is, like, as I got older, as my parents got older, I started hosting the holiday dinners at my house. And I drove myself crazy, my husband crazy, because I had to clean up everything, organized everything. And it was a very stressful situation, because I always felt like they're coming into my house. Their houses were always nice and clean and decluttered when we would go there. and I didn't want to feel like I was not good enough. And that was the big thing with that. But eventually I just learned to accept that. As I did start getting more clutter out, I started opening up a little bit and saying, hey, this is just how I am. And if they can't accept that, if it's not perfect, then that's becoming more their problem than my problem. And that was, I think, when I started coming out from behind the clutter, and I didn't use it as an excuse not to do things. And it's been a long process. And I think that's what a lot of people do, is that, they're afraid to have company over because they don't feel they'll be good enough, and they'll be criticized, and it's not perfect. So if their house is a total mess, if they don't invite people over, that's their excuse. So they're hiding behind it. Mm-hmm. It keeps them from doing things that they probably want to do, mm-hmm. but they don't feel that they're going to be able to be good enough doing it.
And so have you found a way to handle it without it being so stressful? Like you said, when, people were coming over, like, has something helped you to not go into that super stress place?
I think a big turning point for me was when in 2008, I started my website, and 3 months later I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh my God.
And when you go through something like that, I'd finally gotten to a point that about being creative. I finally was saying, I can put my writing out there. I didn't know if anybody would read it. I didn't know how they would, if they'd criticize it, but it didn't have to be rejected like when you send things to magazines. Mm-hmm. So I was not having that rejection. So I put that out there, brave enough finally to do that. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that went through a whole lot of other emotions and life-changing. And I think at that point, I just learned that it's just, if they don't like the way things are, I shouldn't worry about what everybody else thinks. I have to think about what I think and where I'm good enough.
Yeah. And, we talk a lot about in InStory about how your struggles become your wisdom. And mm-hmm. I always admire people when you share your story. Like, maybe you can say a little bit more about, we didn't really talk about this specifically, but that a lot of women have gone through breast cancer and gotten up off the other end. And I would love for you to say maybe one or two things about how the wisdom you've learned from that, like how that has kind of the insights, like how has that helped you to like come out of hiding even more, in a sense, because otherwise you wouldn't have said in the interview that you were diagnosed with breast cancer. And I think this is a model of be brave enough to tell our stories to each other. You know what I mean? So that we don't feel like we're hiding all alone in our stories.
Well, I think you start to realize when you are diagnosed with something that is a life-threatening disease, that all those little things, all the little clutter, all the the cluttered stories that we tell ourselves, they lose their significance because it's something else you're facing, your own mortality. And wanting to do your things, being creative, I wanted to do more writing, I wanted to do more photography and other things. And I always seem to put them off. You feel like you always have all this time, and you don't. Mm-hmm. And that's where coming out from, the clutter, the emotional ties to a lot of it, the excuses for it, started losing that significance. Mm-hmm. And even though I was writing about it, and even though I had done it a lot, and the reason I started writing about it was because I felt I had reached a point I was pretty decluttered. Mm-hmm. and pretty organized. And over the next few years after that, there was other family issues that went on that I realized I really wasn't. Mm-hmm. I had reached a certain stage, but I hadn't really opened up. Even though I had finally done the website, I think my writing was very methodical. It was dry and boring, really, to say so, because I wasn't able to put my own stories into my writing. And that's been, I guess that was a turning point, but it took a while. And now I feel like I can start putting myself into my writing, telling my stories, hopefully helping other people realize that the clutter is really not that important. Those items we put such a big significance on is not that important when there's so much more in our lives that we can open up to, and so much more creativity and things that we can do that we're afraid to, and it's easy to hide behind and have those excuses.
I really so appreciate, Janice, that you're sharing your story. I hope really people listening feel that model, because it keeps us so stuck, I think, when we don't think we can put ourselves in our story. Like, and I think that's like sort of the theory, the whole theme of this show is to come out of hiding and dare to be seen. And, it's my vision of InStory and everything is that I think we're being called to come out of hiding,
Right.
really, and then, so say a little bit more about what's happening now as you're coming out. Like, you wouldn't even be on this interview, right, if you weren't willing to come out of hiding. But where is this? I want you to say more about the creativity and the opening and where it's leading you, and how you see just kind of your vision for how this is so important for so many of us.
Well, I think with so many of us have so much more to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the lessons we've learned from our stories, our experiences, that others can know that they're not alone. They're not the only one going through this. We may be on the other side, but we can kind of give that hand to help them through it. Mm-hmm. There's, a lot of crisis, but there's a lot of people that have the creativity, the arts. We need to value those, which in our society hasn't been as much value, but those are what bring us happiness and joy in our lives. Whether it's a beautiful sunset on an ocean, which I love, and taking the photographs of that, it's sharing those or sharing words to go with it. If it just kind of inspires other people or just realizes those moments, how precious they are and how beautiful they are, that's what makes our lives so much better. But if we don't bring out those stories and we don't bring out our talents, and we hide behind our clutter, our old stories, which are clutter in one way or another, that we're not offering the world all those gifts to make it a better place.
It's so true. I mean, I really never thought of it like that, how our old stories are kind of a clutter. I love that. I love when things go together that don't usually go together. So if our old stories are part of our clutter, what's happening now with you as you're clearing your old stories? Like, say more about this opening up that happens, like, that metaphor, like you clear space and then what, right? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, when you clear the space and you clear your old stories, you have to fill it with something. And that's where you can that's where I'm trying to bring out more of my stories, more of my creativity, more of my words, photography, and helping other people realize that we don't need to stay stuck behind our clutter. We don't need to stay stuck behind our old stories, because there's a lot of people out there who have journeyed through this. And it's okay to ask for help,
right?
Which has been extremely hard for me. And I'm learning to do that. And I think that I would like to help other people learn that that's the important thing, is that you don't have to do it alone. And that everybody's got something to offer. Everybody has got something to help other people. And I know for me, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that what you have to offer doesn't feel like it's significant.
Right.
And what you've taught us in InStory is that if something moves us, it will move other people too. And that's hard, because we always judge ourselves much harder than we judge someone else. We may look at their art, or we may look at their writing, or whatever they have to offer, and say, well, that's great, they do a fantastic job. But but when we try to do it, we say, oh, we're not any good.
Right. I know.
So it's hard to put out there. It's hard to come out from hiding, because we're afraid, because we judge ourselves so much harder than we judge other people. And I know I have, and now I'm trying to let myself come out, and not having the clutter, learning to get rid of the old stories, when you come up with this big space, you also come up with a void that needs to be filled. And that's where I want to be able to fill it with my talents and my skills and better stories.
Yeah.
About I am good enough. I'm not perfect, but I'm good enough. Right. And what I have to say, even if it only helps one other person, is good enough.
Totally. You know, I'm always all about that. What we have to say has value. What you have to say has value. And, you know, and I know you're already working with someone else in InStory, already helping her to make a difference. You know, as soon as one of the women in InStory, as soon as she heard Janice works with clutter, she said, please, can you help me? Right? Because nobody clears clutter alone. And we don't get out of our blocks and out of our old stories alone. It doesn't work. We get stuck in that spin cycle of, you know, telling yourself over and over you're going to do it and then beating yourself up over and over for not doing it. It's like,
right.
So, so Janice, tell us a little bit about what your free gift is and how people can find more support from you kind of out in the wide world there.
Okay, well, my free gift is a ebook, PDF, be able to download it. And it just has basic tips on clearing out some of your clutter. It will give you some systems and ways and methods to do that. And also for the holidays, which we have coming up at this time, and that's going to be important. There's a lot of tips on organizing for the holidays, so you can plan your meals and feel comfortable having people over and clean out that clutter and get everything done without being everything last minute. And it has other tips on traveling, which a lot of people do during this time of year. So it's that's a download that you can have and get started with that. My website has a lot of other things on it as far as articles and blog posts. And I'm expanding and basically revitalizing my website right now. So it's a work in progress, but it's a lot of good information there. And I do have a Facebook page, Cut Clutter with Scissors on Facebook. And I do have some groups on there that are just beginning, and those are areas where you can get more tips and you can ask questions or offer suggestions to other people. And also you can email me, and I'm always willing to answer questions.
Good, because here's the thing. If this resonates with you at all, bravely download her tips. I know it doesn't always feel comfortable, but bravely download them. Go to Janice's website, reach out to her, connect. Don't sit alone if you are resonating with having clutter. And look, Janice is a perfect person to connect with. You will not feel embarrassed or ashamed or bad that you're going through this, because she has been down this road before. And that is a part of the issue that a lot of people have, is just feeling embarrassed and ashamed about it. And so download the PDF, look at it, and then share in the Facebook group. We're encouraging everybody to connect in the Facebook group. If you want to be nudged a little by us, we'll jump in there to support you, and you can say, I did this, or I'm going to do this by this date. Right? Because that kind of support really helps. And we don't want you to sit alone. We want you to come out of hiding and dare to be seen. Okay? So Janice, as we wrap up, maybe leave us with a few last words of inspiration and encouragement.
Well, it's like you were saying, it's like you don't have to do it alone. There's nothing wrong with you. You just haven't learned, sometimes you just haven't learned simple systems that make it easier. Sometimes you have to learn how to just detach from the clutter emotionally. And there's a lot of people that can help. There's a lot of ideas, a lot of places to get inspiration, but you don't have to do it alone is the biggest thing. Yeah,
it's so true. And also, I think what you said, Janice, about this bigger idea about how like our old stories are a kind of clutter, that's such an interesting idea. And so that as you kind of clear out what story you're telling yourself about yourself, right, then that, I think that will help do stuff on the more physical plane also. Did you find that just one more question, did you find that helped you as you shifted like the stories in your head? Did that help you with taking action in your actual physical house?
that helped a lot, because one of the biggest stories I think I told myself, a lot of people tell themselves, is that because we're not clearing the clutter, we're lazy. And that's not true. A lot of times that has nothing to do with it. A lot of times we feel like we're not good enough. We're not perfectionists. So it's like, if you can't have it perfect, why even try?
Right.
And so these are stories we're telling ourselves, that we have to let go of those stories and realize that it's okay.
Yeah.
We're not lazy. We just don't have all the tools to help us at this point. And we can get those tools. We can get that support. And it's okay. We're not perfect, and we're not supposed to be perfect.
Right. Right. Yes. I could not agree more. So don't be perfect. Come out of hiding. Dare to be seen. Share your creativity, your inspiration, and ask for help around your struggles, because we really are all in this together. Janice, thank you so much for sharing your story, being brave, telling the truth, and really showing up to be a model for people so much.
Thank you, Devorah, for having me.
All right, everybody, as I always say in farewell, remember to go out in the world, share your story, live your purpose, and be a blessing. Bye, folks.